You've returned, or perhaps this is your first time stepping into one of my chronicles. Either way, I commend your curiosity. Now, a word of advice. Great minds require consistency. To ensure you never miss a revelation, I suggest you subscribe. And should you find my deductions enlightening, a mere tap of the like button would suffice as appreciation. Now then, let me tell you of a dream, or perhaps something far stranger. Chapter 1. A dream that wasn't. I awoke to the hum of electricity, not the gentle crackling of a fireplace, nor the distant murmur of London's carriages. Number. This was something else entirely. I opened my eyes. The sky above was a deep violet, fractured by ribbons of neon blue that pulsed like veins across the heavens. The air was thick with a metallic scent, tinged with something artificial. The buildings around me stretched impossibly high, their surfaces alive with moving lights and flickering symbols I did not recognize. But I had seen this place before. A memory, a fragment, a dream. I rose to my feet, my fingers brushing against a slick black pavement that seemed to shift beneath my touch. There was something unsettlingly familiar about it all, yet different, like reading a book one has read before, only to find the words have changed. I took a breath, steadying myself. This was no ordinary dream. Where am I? I murmured, though the answer clawed at the edges of my mind. Not London, not my world, and yet, in some way, I could not yet comprehend. It was. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned sharply. A man approached, his silhouette sharp against the neon haze. His coat was long, dark, and his face hidden beneath a visor that glowed faintly green. "You shouldn't be here," he said. The words struck me with an eerie sense of déjà vu. I had heard them before. But when? The man stepped closer, his movements smooth, calculated. I could not see his face, but there was something in the way he carried himself, something I recognized. "You look confused," he continued, his voice distorted slightly by the modulator in his visor. "You shouldn't be." I straightened, taking in his attire. The coat was tailored, worn with purpose, its fabric woven with strands of metallic thread that shimmered under the neon glow. His gloves bore intricate markings along the knuckles, symbols I did not immediately recognize, but they, too, seemed familiar. "Do I know you?" I asked. The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering my question. "You did," he replied. "Once." I felt the weight of those words settle into my mind like a puzzle piece clicking into place. He was not lying, and yet I could not place him. "You were here before," he said, stepping closer. "Or perhaps elsewhere, a different version of here. The details change, but the essence remains. Tell me, do you remember the Whispering Grid?" The name struck something deep within me, a flicker of something half-formed, slipping just beyond my reach. "The Whispering Grid," I repeated, more to myself than to him. "No, I don't recall that name." And yet, it felt carved into the marrow of my bones. The man gave a slow nod, as if he had expected my answer. "Then you're further behind than I thought," he murmured. A sudden noise, sharp, mechanical, sliced through the night. A burst of static filled the air, and the neon lights around us flickered wildly, as though the city itself had been momentarily disrupted. The man's posture stiffened. He turned his head slightly, as if listening to something beyond my range of perception. "They've noticed you," he said. "We don't have much time." "Who?" I demanded, but the man ignored my question. He reached into his coat and produced a small metallic device, no larger than a pocket watch. Its surface was etched with the same strange symbols that adorned his gloves. "Take this," he said, "and listen carefully. When the lights change, you must move." I hesitated. The device pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat trapped in metal. "Move where?" I asked. The man exhaled sharply. "Wherever you can. Just don't stay still. They are coming." And then, without warning, he turned and vanished into the darkness. I was left standing alone beneath the neon sky, clutching a device I did not understand, in a city that no longer obeyed the rules of reality as I knew them. And somewhere, in the distance, the lights began to change. Chapter 2. The Shifting Lights. The lights began to change. A ripple of neon blue swept through the city, shifting the colors of the buildings, the sky, the very air itself. The once violet heavens pulsed a deep crimson. The digital billboards flickered in rapid succession, displaying symbols and faces I could not comprehend. And then I heard it. A hum beneath my feet, subtle, but growing stronger. Not the usual vibration of machinery, nor the distant murmur of a restless city. This was something else. Something alive. I tightened my grip around the metallic device the stranger had given me. It was warm now, almost pulsing in rhythm with the city itself. Whatever this was, whatever rules governed this place, I was at the center of it. From somewhere behind me, a voice, sharp, mechanical. Identity deviation detected. I turned, and for the first time, I saw them, a group of figures standing at the far end of the street. Their silhouettes were human-like, but wrong. Their faces were obscured by smooth reflective masks, devoid of eyes or mouths. Their limbs moved with unnerving precision, as if following a rhythm only they could hear. One of them tilted its head, and the voice came again, though none of them spoke. "Unauthorized anomaly detected. Prepare for assimilation." I stepped backward, my mind racing. Assimilation? The word carried a weight of finality I did not like. The device in my hand vibrated violently. A sharp yet electric jolt surged through my palm, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. A vision. No, a memory. A dimly lit corridor, a metallic door, humming with energy. A voice, distorted, echoing in my skull. "Find the operator." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I had heard them before. But where? The figures began to move toward me, their steps synchronized, calculated. I had mere seconds to act. I glanced at the device, now glowing faintly. The stranger's words echoed in my mind. "When the lights change, you must move." The lights had changed. It was time to move. I turned sharply and ran. The streets blurred as I moved, the towering buildings warping around me in impossible ways. Neon symbols flickered across the walls, rearranging themselves mid-glance, as if the city itself were trying to guide or mislead me. The figures pursued. Their movements were disturbingly smooth, almost gliding across the pavement without effort. Their presence sent waves of static through the air, distorting the sounds around me. I could feel them gaining. A sharp turn, a narrow alley, barely illuminated by the faint glow of a flickering sign. I dove into the shadows, pressing myself against the cold metal wall, my breath steady but controlled. Silence. Then, a whisper. "Detective." I froze. The voice had come from directly beside me, but there was no one there. Slowly, cautiously, I turned my head, and my reflection stared back. A glass panel, a darkened storefront, a fractured mirror, My reflection stood before me, but something was wrong. He did not move as I did. He did not breathe as I did. And then he smiled. Not a natural expression, not a grin of familiarity, but a slow, deliberate curve of the lips, unnatural in its execution. "You don't belong here," my reflection said. I stepped back. The reflection remained, watching, smiling. Behind me, the city shifted again. The neon flickered wildly, the air thickened, and the world itself seemed to hold its breath. The masked figures had stopped. They did not advance. They were waiting. My reflection tilted his head, just as the stranger had done earlier. His eyes, identical to mine, flickered with unreadable intent. "You've been here before," he whispered. "You just don't remember." The city groaned. The masked figures took a step forward. The device in my hand burned. I had one question left to ask, one that could change everything. And so, I asked it. Chapter 3. The Reflection's Truth. I stood frozen before the fractured mirror, my own reflection staring back at me with an expression that did not belong to me. It was a face I had worn 1,000 times, sharp, calculating, ever observant. But now it was something else entirely. It was watching me. "You've been here before," the reflection whispered, its lips moving a fraction slower than my own. "You just don't remember." A trick of the mind. That was the rational explanation. Hallucination, stress-induced mirage, or some unseen manipulation of the neon haze that coated this place. But I knew better. This was real. Or rather, as real as anything else here. The masked figures stood still, waiting, watching, their presence pressed against the edges of my consciousness, like shadows cast by a light I could not see. The air between us was taut with unspoken intent, as if they were expecting me to take a step, to react, to comply. I turned my gaze back to my reflection. "If I don't remember," I said slowly, measuring each word, "then tell me, who are you?" My reflection did not answer immediately. Instead, the neon of the city flickered across the glass, illuminating his face in sharp, unnatural hues. When he finally spoke, it was not with a name, nor an explanation. "You are in the wrong version," he said. The wrong version. A concept foreign to me, yet one that struck with eerie familiarity, like a book whose pages had been shuffled, a melody slightly out of tune. "What does that mean?" I asked, but even as the words left my lips, I was not certain I wanted to know the answer. The reflection's eyes flickered. A smile, slow, deliberate, curled at the edges of his mouth. "Find the operator," he whispered. A sharp crack tore through the air. The mirror shattered. The city trembled. A pulse of energy surged through the streets, distorting the neon signs, warping the buildings, sending static through the air. And then, motion. The masked figures lunged. I moved on instinct, darting into the alleyway, my mind racing to untangle the threads of information, now flooding my thoughts. The wrong version. The operator. My own reflection defying reality. What was this place? A mechanical shriek cut through the air as the masked figures pursued, their movements eerily synchronized. Their bodies shifted in and out of focus, as if the space around them refused to fully define them. They did not run. They did not stumble. They simply moved. Ahead, the alley twisted, bending at angles that should not have existed. The walls pulsed as if breathing, the lights above shifting unpredictably. I could feel the rules of this place breaking around me. And then, there it was. A door. Not an ordinary door. Not one that belonged in any conventional sense. It was sleek, metallic, seamlessly fused with the shifting architecture of the alleyway. Symbols ran along its surface, the same ones I had glimpsed on the stranger's gloves. And in its center, a small indentation. I looked at the device in my hand. No time to hesitate. I pressed the device into the indentation. The door dissolved. I stumbled forward into a vast, dimly lit chamber. The walls stretched far beyond what should have been possible, a space seemingly carved out of the fabric of the city itself. Monitors flickered on every surface, their screens filled with endless streams of data, shifting too fast for the eye to follow. And at the center of it all, a chair. A figure sat within it, shrouded in shadow, cables and wires snaking from their body into the machinery around them. Their face was hidden beneath a visor, the same eerie green glow emanating from its surface. I took a step closer. The air was heavy, charged with something beyond mere electricity. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming. "You made it," the figure said, their voice smooth, artificial. I narrowed my eyes. The operator, I presume. A pause, then laughter. Not cruel, not mocking, but knowing. "I told you we'd meet again," they said. A cold realization settled into my mind. They spoke as if we had done this before. My reflection's words echoed once more. "You are in the wrong version." And with that, the operator leaned forward, the green light of their visor illuminating the chamber. "We have a lot to discuss, Sherlock Holmes." Chapter 4. The Operator's Truth. "We have a lot to discuss, Sherlock Holmes." The operator's voice was calm, methodical. They sat motionless in the center of the chamber, their body connected to the walls by a web of cables that pulsed with rhythmic energy. The green glow of their visor flickered slightly, as if processing unseen data. I took a measured step forward, studying them. "You speak as if we are old acquaintances," I said, "and yet I have no recollection of you." The operator let out a quiet laugh, a sound laced with static. "You say that every time." Something inside me recoiled. Every time. An implication buried within those two words, one I was not certain I was prepared to unearth. "Explain," I demanded, keeping my voice level. The operator tilted their head slightly, the cables along their arms tightening. "I assume you've noticed the inconsistencies," they said. "Patterns that don't align. People who almost fit, but don't. Rules shifting without warning." I exhaled slowly. "I'm in a dream." A statement, not a question. "Not exactly." The operator leaned forward slightly. The light of their visor pulsed, as if considering how best to phrase their next words. "You are in a version," they said finally. "A version of what?" I asked. The operator gestured with a gloved hand, and the monitors lining the walls flickered into motion. Streams of data raced across the screens, forming indecipherable symbols, fractured images, and faces. Familiar faces. Watson, Lestrade, Mrs. Hudson, but not as I knew them. Watson's face was lined with scars, his right eye covered by a sleek mechanical implant. Lestrade wore a long coat embedded with glowing circuitry, his badge replaced by a symbol I did not recognize. Mrs. Hudson. Her expression was cold, detached, a glint of something metallic at the base of her neck. These were not the people I knew, and yet they were. I turned back to the operator. What am I looking at? Possibilities, they replied. Versions of them. Of you. The weight of the revelation settled over me like a dense fog. I was no stranger to theoretical science, to the concept of parallel reasoning, alternative outcomes. But this was something else entirely. You expect me to believe, I said slowly, that I am not in a mere dream, but an iteration of reality, a variation of myself trapped within a fragmented world. The operator nodded once. You are beginning to understand. I clenched my jaw. That is absurd. Is it? The screens flickered again. More faces, more cities, some familiar, others alien, some too distorted to comprehend. Your mind is an anomaly, Holmes, the operator continued. For reasons I have yet to decipher, you exist at the edges of multiple iterations. That is why you remember things that should not be. Why you feel the echoes of places you have never been. A cold sensation settled in my chest. I had dreamed of this city before, but it had not been this city. And yet, it had. I took a breath, forcing my mind to remain grounded. If this is true, I said carefully, why am I here now? The operator hesitated. Then, in a voice devoid of its usual amusement, they answered, because something is wrong. The lights dimmed. A tremor passed through the chamber, rattling the monitors, sending waves of static across the screens. The operator stiffened. Their visor flickered. They found us. The masked figures. I turned sharply. The door I had entered through no longer existed. The walls of the chamber seemed to be compressing, the very fabric of this place rejecting my presence. The operator moved suddenly, reaching into their coat. From within, they retrieved a small, hexagonal device covered in glowing blue etchings. They tossed it to me. If you want answers, you need to find him, they said. Him who? I snapped. But before the operator could answer, the room fractured. A burst of energy, like glass shattering in reverse, exploded outward, distorting everything around me. The screens melted into liquid light. The walls folded inward. The operator's form glitched, fragmenting into overlapping silhouettes. And then, nothing. Silence. I was standing somewhere new. A street. The neon skyline above flickered unnaturally, as if struggling to maintain its form. The city felt hollow star. In my palm, the hexagonal device pulsed faintly, the only trace that my encounter with the operator had been real. But I had no time to process what had happened, because in the distance, beyond the static-ridden skyline, I saw him. A man, standing alone beneath the neon glow. And he was watching me. A silence stretched between us, heavy with meaning. I had not been dreaming. I had been splitting. 1,000 versions of myself scattered across this fragmented existence. And one of them, this one, had stayed behind. The city trembled again, a deep groan reverberating through its core. The neon sky rippled like water, distorting as if under immense strain. The other Holmes exhaled sharply. We don't have much time. For what? I asked. His expression darkened. For you to make a choice. Chapter 6. A choice between versions. For you to make a choice, the other me said. The city trembled again, a low groan reverberating through the skyline. The neon lights overhead flickered, casting erratic shadows that stretched unnaturally along the pavement. The air itself felt charged, vibrating with unseen tension. I measured his expression, cold, deliberate. identical to my own, yet carrying the weight of something I could not yet define. "What choice?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. The other Holmes took a slow breath. "The echo grid is failing," he said. "It has been for a long time. You feel it, don't you? The distortions, the way the world bends and corrects itself around you." I did not respond immediately, because I had felt it. This world was unraveling. The other me continued, his voice precise. "Every time you enter, the grid shifts to accommodate you. But that process is unstable. Your presence here splits reality into fragments, leaving behind echoes of yourself that do not belong." I exhaled sharply. "You're telling me that simply by existing here, I am damaging this world." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Not just this world. All of them." A silence settled between us. For the first time since arriving, I felt something I rarely experienced. Doubt. A sharp static crackled through the air. Both of us turned our heads in unison. The masked figures had returned. Their presence pressed against the edges of my consciousness, like an unseen weight, distorting the air with their mere existence. Their steps were synchronized, their movement eerily smooth. But something was different now. They weren't advancing toward me. They were moving toward him. The other Holmes stiffened. He took a step back, exhaling sharply. "Time's up," he muttered. I narrowed my eyes. "What do they want with you?" He clenched his jaw. "They are here to correct the anomaly." I frowned. "What anomaly?" The other me turned to face me fully. The green light of the neon above reflected against his sharp features, casting long shadows along his face. "Me," he said. A realization settled over me. If the echo grid left behind fragments of myself every time I entered, then those fragments were not supposed to exist independently. They were remnants of a presence that had already moved on. Which meant, "You were never meant to be here," I said quietly. The other Holmes exhaled, his expression unreadable. None of us were. The masked figures grew closer. Their presence sent ripples through the world itself, distorting the pavement beneath their feet, unraveling the structures around them. They were not merely here to correct an anomaly. They were here to erase it. And for the first time, the other me looked afraid. He turned to me sharply. "You need to leave." I studied him carefully. "And what will happen to you?" A flicker of something passed through his gaze. Resignation, perhaps. "That," he said, "is not your concern." But it was. Because for all my reasoning, for all my deductions, one fact was undeniable. He was me. The city trembled violently now. The skyline rippled, its colors bleeding into the dark void above. The masked figures raised their hands. Reality itself shifted in response. The other Holmes took a sharp breath. "Sherlock," he said, for the first time addressing me by name. "Make the choice." I clenched my jaw. What are my options? He exhaled, glancing at the approaching figures. "You can leave. Wake up. Forget all of this. The grid will recalibrate, and you will never return here again." I frowned. "And the second option." He met my gaze. "Stay and help me stop it." Chapter 7. Stay or wake. The other me held my gaze, his expression sharp, unwavering. The city trembled violently around us, the neon sky flickering like a dying flame. The masked figures were nearly upon us now, their forms bending reality with each step. And still, the choice lingered between us. "Wake up and forget," he said, his voice steady. "Or stay and fight." A simple decision, yet one with consequences beyond my understanding. I considered the facts. If I left, this world would vanish from my consciousness, erased like a half-remembered dream. If I stayed, I would be defying the natural order, anchoring myself to a reality that was unraveling. Neither option was ideal. Neither offered guarantees. But then, when has certainty ever been a luxury afforded to me? The masked figures raised their hands, and the city groaned in response. I exhaled sharply. "Tell me how we stop this." The other me gave a small nod. "Then you've made your choice." The air shimmered violently as the masked figures advanced, their presence distorting the very fabric of existence. "Move!" the other Holmes barked, grabbing my arm and pulling me back. I followed his lead, darting down a side street as the pavement behind us folded inward, collapsing into a void of shifting neon and static. "Where are we going?" I demanded. "The core," he said without hesitation. "It's the only way to reset the grid." The core. I didn't need to ask what it was. Somewhere deep inside me, I already knew. The city shifted unnaturally as we moved. Streets restructured themselves in real time, blocking pathways, opening corridors where none had existed before. It was as if the world itself was trying to prevent our progress. The masked figures were relentless. Every time I glanced back, they were closer, their movements impossibly smooth, unburdened by the chaos around them. I turned to the other homes. If this place collapses, what happens to them? "They cease," he said simply. I frowned. Then why are they trying to stop us? The other me hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Because they are part of the system, and the system does not want to be erased. The thought was unsettling. The grid itself was not just breaking apart. It was fighting back. The ground beneath us trembled again, sending waves of static through the air. A building to our right disintegrated mid-collapse, freezing in a suspended state of existence. "Faster!" the other Holmes shouted. I pushed forward, my mind racing as I tried to understand the full scope of what we were doing. If the grid collapses completely, would it simply reset? Or would everything, including me, vanish? And yet something deep within me knew this had to end. A sharp turn, a dark corridor, untouched by the neon light. At the end of the path stood a massive door, its metallic surface humming with energy. Symbols flickered across it, shifting, reforming, almost as if reacting to our presence. The core. We don't have long, the other me said, placing his hand against the door. If we're lucky, the failsafe is still intact. I narrowed my eyes. And if it isn't? He hesitated. Then we cease to exist. I exhaled slowly, comforting. The door vibrated beneath his touch. The symbols rearranged themselves, forming something coherent. A pattern. A asterisk code asterisk. And then a voice. Software familiar, but distorted. You cannot undo this. Star. The words resonated through the space, shaking the walls. I turned sharply, scanning the shadows. Who said that? The other Holmes inhaled sharply. It's him. A figure stepped forward from the darkness. His silhouette was eerily similar to our own, yet wrong in ways I could not immediately define. His movements were jagged, unnatural, as though he was struggling to remain in existence. And then, as he moved into the neon light, I saw his face. I saw my face. Chapter 8. The Sherlock that shouldn't exist. I saw my face. But it wasn't truly mine. The figure that stepped forward was distorted, flickering between forms as if struggling to stabilize. His features twisted slightly with each movement, one moment sharp and precise, the next blurred and fragmented. His eyes, identical to mine, burned with an intensity that sent a sharp pulse of unease through my mind. He studied me, tilting his head slightly, his lips curling into something resembling a smile. "Ah," he said, his voice layered, as if a dozen versions of himself were speaking at once. "So it's finally you, this time." The other Holmes beside me tensed. His fingers twitched slightly, as though resisting the urge to reach for a weapon that did not exist. "You need to keep moving," he murmured to me. "Ignore him." But I couldn't. Because something deep inside me told me that this was the moment everything had been leading toward. I narrowed my eyes. Who are you? The fragmented version of me exhaled, his form glitching again, his very existence pulsing in and out of focus. "I think you already know the answer." I did. And yet, I needed to hear it. "Say it," I demanded. The corrupted me took a slow step forward, and the neon around him dimmed. The echo grid itself recoiled from his presence. "I," he said, his voice quieter now, almost regretful, "am the one who never left." A cold realization sank into my mind. If the echo grid left behind fragments of me every time I entered, then what would happen if one of those versions refused to fade? I swallowed. You're an anomaly. The fragmented Holmes gave a soft chuckle. An echo. More precisely, he corrected. One that learned how to persist. The city trembled violently again. The masked figures were close now, their forms flickering as reality around them warped. They did not seem concerned with the fragmented version of me, because he was not their target. I was. The corrupted me followed my gaze. They think you are the anomaly now, he said, because, in a way, you are. I clenched my jaw. Explain. The fragmented me exhaled. This place operates on equilibrium, he said. Every time a version of you enters, another must be left behind. That is how the system corrects itself. But you... He pointed a trembling hand at me. You were never supposed to come back. My thoughts raced, calculating possibilities, searching for gaps in his reasoning. But the conclusion was inevitable. I was never meant to return. The echo grid had a system, a pattern, and I had disrupted it, broken it. I inhaled sharply. If that's true, then why am I here? The fragmented me hesitated for the first time. His form flickered violently, as though struggling against something unseen. Because, he said at last, something is changing. The neon skyline above shuddered. The world trembled beneath my feet. The masked figures raised their hands in unison. And the core screamed. A pulse of raw energy exploded outward from the metallic door, sending waves of distortion rippling through the air. Everything twisted. The buildings, the lights, the streets themselves bending and curling impossibly. The masked figures staggered, their forms destabilizing. Even the fragmented Holmes faltered, clutching his head as his own body flickered uncontrollably. The other me, the one who had guided me here, grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, urgent. We have to go, he said through clenched teeth. Now! I turned my gaze back to the fragmented me. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. If you leave, he said, his voice nearly drowned by the roaring chaos, you will forget. The grid will reset, and none of this will remain. I clenched my jaw. And if I stay... The fragmented me smiled. Then you will finally understand. The masked figures moved again, faster now, their distorted forms stabilizing. The core pulsed violently. We had seconds left. The other Holmes pulled me toward the door. Sherlock, We don't have time for this. I turned back to the fragmented version of me, and I made my decision. Chapter 9. A decision made. The city trembled. The core pulsed. The masked figures surged forward. And I made my decision. I pulled free from the other Holmes's grip and turned back toward the fragmented version of myself. His form was breaking apart, flickering in and out of existence, his smile unwavering. "You want me to understand," I said, voice steady. "Then show me." The other me, the one who had guided me here, stiffened. "Sherlock, no." I ignored him. The fragmented Holmes' expression shifted. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Recognition, ... He extended his hand toward me. "Then step forward," he said, "and let go of everything you know." The masked figures were almost upon us. The air screamed as reality itself was torn apart. I stepped forward. The world collapsed. A shockwave of raw energy erupted from the core, and everything was pulled into it. The cityscape fractured, dissolving into spirals of neon light. The masked figures vanished, their forms shredded by the unraveling of the grid. The other Holmes, the one who wanted to leave, was pulled away from me, his voice lost in the void. I was falling. But not through space, not through time, through something else. Through every version of myself that ever existed. Faces flashed before me. My faces. Thousands of them. Millions. Each one caught in a different moment, a different world. Some I recognized from previous dreams. Others were the foreign, impossibilities that should not exist. A Sherlock Holmes, who never met Watson. A Sherlock Holmes, who died young. A Sherlock Holmes, who never became a detective at all. A Sherlock Holmes, who never existed. I could feel myself splitting, my consciousness dividing into 1,000 perspectives at once. And at the center of it all, the fragmented me, watching, waiting, smiling. We landed in silence. No more screaming city, no more flickering neon skyline, no more distortion. Just darkness. I slowly pushed myself upright, my limbs heavy, my thoughts sluggish. The space around me was vast, infinite, yet confined. A paradox. The fragmented version of me stood nearby, completely stable now. No flickering, no distortion. Solid, real, dot dot. Where are we? I asked. He exhaled. The only place that ever truly existed, he said. The space between versions. A cold sensation spread through my mind. You mean the echo grid? He shook his head. No, Sherlock. That was just an access point. This is the truth. I studied him carefully. Then tell me. The fragmented me regarded me for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down, crossed his legs, folded his hands, as if waiting. And suddenly, I understood. This was the choice. Not to leave, not to fight, but to stop, period. For years, I had been trapped in an endless cycle, falling between realities, between dreams, between versions of myself. And each time, I had kept moving, kept solving, kept searching for the next answer, the next puzzle. But this version of me, this fragmented Sherlock Holmes, he had learned something I had not. That to truly understand, I had to stop running. I swallowed. If I sit down, I said carefully, what happens? The fragmented me smiled faintly. You wake up. A long silence. I exhaled. Then, slowly, deliberately, I sat down. Darkness, silence, stillness. For the first time in what felt like eternity, I was no longer moving. No grid, no cities, no versions of myself whispering in my mind. Just quiet. And then I opened my eyes. The scent of tobacco, the faint crackling of a fireplace, the soft creak of a wooden chair shifting under weight. I was home. Baker Street. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. My mind was clear. No flickering lights, no distortion, no whispering echoes. Just reality. A knock at the door. Holmes? Watson's voice. Warm, familiar. Are you awake? I closed my eyes briefly. Then, a small smile played at the corner of my lips. Yes, Watson, I said. I believe I am. Chapter 10. Awake or not. Yes, Watson, I said. I believe I am. A pause. Then the door creaked open. Watson stepped inside, his expression mildly concerned as he studied me. "You were talking in your sleep," he said. "Rather a rare occurrence for you." I stretched my fingers slightly, grounding myself in the sensation of the real world, the solid feel of the chair beneath me, the faint scent of pipe smoke lingering in the air, the comforting disarray of my study, filled with familiar objects of deduction. Reality. I exhaled, glancing toward the window. Dawn was breaking over London. "A rather unusual dream, I suspect," Watson continued, moving to the side table to pour himself a cup of tea. "You kept muttering something about echoes." A flicker of something passed through my thoughts. Not quite a memory, more like a trace of something distant, slipping just beyond my grasp. Echoes. I tapped my fingers against the armrest, thoughtful. "Tell me, Watson," I said, "do you believe a dream can be more than a simple fabrication of the subconscious? That it can, perhaps, hold meaning beyond mere illusion?" Watson raised an eyebrow. "You're asking me about the significance of dreams?" I gave a small nod. "Indulge me." He considered for a moment, then sighed. "I would say dreams are merely reflections of thoughts we have yet to process, fragments of memory and imagination interwoven by the mind while at rest. Nothing more." "Logical," I mused. "But what if a dream felt real? More real than waking life?" Watson sipped his tea, studying me carefully. "Then I would say the dreamer is either overtired or bordering on madness." A smirk tugged at the corner of my lips. "Comforting." Watson set his cup down, his expression shifting from amusement to curiosity. "Holmes," he said carefully, "what exactly did you dream about?" I hesitated. The details were fading now, dissolving like mist under the morning sun. I tried to grasp at them, to hold on to the neon lights, the masked figures, the whispers of the echo grid, but they were slipping away, just as my fragmented self had warned they would. Still, something remained, a lingering sensation. I was somewhere else, I said finally. A world not unlike this one, yet entirely different. I was investigating something. I frowned, the edges of the memory unraveling. No, I was being investigated. I was nothing. The memory was gone. Watson watched me, waiting. Finally, I let out a soft chuckle and shook my head. "It appears I cannot recall." Watson smirked. "A rare admission indeed." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It was a dream. Of course, it was a dream. And yet... My fingers curled slightly against the armrest, the sensation of something cool, metallic. A shape. My breath hitched. I lifted my hand slowly, resting in my palm, pulsing faintly with an almost imperceptible hum, was a small hexagonal device. The world seemed to still around me. Watson continued talking, unaware, something about a case or a letter he had received, but his voice was distant, drowned out by the deafening realization pounding in my skull. A dream does not leave behind artifacts. The device was real. It was here. The memories might have faded, but something had followed me back. I curled my fingers around the device, concealing it within my palm. My mind was racing, yet outwardly, I forced myself to remain composed. Watson glanced at me, noticing my silence. Holmes. I looked at him, my mind already piecing together new possibilities. Yes, Watson. He gave me a questioning look. Are you quite all right? I hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then, I smiled. The same smile my fragmented self had given me. Quite, I said. Now, tell me about this case of yours.